Bro, there's no full auto in the building. Hey, no full autoing in the buildings, bro.
I'm not. I'm not full autoing.
That's not full auto?
It's not full auto. This is.
Damn, bro, okay. Should I be using full auto or semi-automatic? Now that seems to be the contention a lot of the time when playing games like Ready or Not. When it comes to using a rifle in single fire, there is very little deviation and variability in how you're going to be shooting after per shot. Each shot is going to be landing exactly when you want it to land and where you're aiming precisely. So obviously this will lead to more accurate shot placement, more consistent shot placement. You are less likely to miss a follow-up shot. Now with full auto, obviously, as it sounds, fully automatic means that you are going to need to control the rifle very effectively, and with other variables like getting shot at can change your aiming. There's going to be a less tight grouping, and it's going to be harder to hit your target in general. But the benefit, obviously, is that your target is going to potentially go down faster. On levels like Twisted Nerve, where you don't really need to worry about any level of armor penetration, a lot of the time, you can just totally use single fire, since a lot of the time, 1 to 2 shots is going to be able to take down your target. But for targets who are unarmored, you don't really need to worry about too much. But for suspects who are usually unarmored, you don't really need to worry about them, since you can just shoot them once or twice and they will go down without any incident. One benefit of using single fire is that it does help you conserve ammo. Whenever you are shooting almost deliberately with every shot, allowing you to conserve ammo. So if you are taking less magazines, single fire can be very handy. Although if you do choose to use fully automatic, even against unarmored targets, the targets will go down very easily, and you can jump from target to target, making sure that each kill is going to be guaranteed, as a flurry of bullets will pretty much always take out any target. Obviously, this is at the cost of costing more ammo. When a target is firing back at you, it is important that they are going to be taken down quickly. Not only does it help you, but it also helps all of your team. So where ammo isn't really a problem, or for example, you are using armor piercing, so you want to fire and go through a piece of cover, full auto will definitely help you easily sail through the cover the most effective way, as single fire sometimes will be very unreliable unless you are using a larger round like a 7.62. Another great benefit of using semi-automatic is that it allows you to shoot between your teammate without risking friendly fire. And if there is friendly fire, it's going to be less likely a chance of killing any of your teammates, as obviously one shot is unlikely usually to take out somebody if they have some level of armor on their back or on their head. Now, when it comes to levels that have targets who have body armor or various higher level grades of plates, like for example, in Neon Tomb, the target in here, who is, I believe, the leader, does have some higher level armored plates, so killing him will be a lot more difficult unless you are shooting him obviously in the head. But a lot of the time in stressful situations, it's hard to identify, locate, aim, and fire perfectly all the time, especially when they are firing back at you. So on other levels like Sins of the Father, which is very common to have body armor, taking a few extra magazines in turn of removing some of your sidearm ammo can be very handy, or taking from your pool of grenades or tactical devices to add a few more things, especially if you are going to go full auto. A lot of the time I find 5 magazines of AP, as long as you're not like crazy firing everywhere and you're pretty precise with how you aim. Having 5 magazines in your primary with armor piercing rounds, assuming that it says penetrating medium armor, as it says on the right, each gun with each type of ammo will tell you what it can pierce and how well it pierces. I'm going to be making a video about the different types of ammo in terms of AP and JHP, which is armor piercing and jacketed hollow point. I'm going to be going over the differences and which ones actually doesn't really matter which one you pick for certain types of weapons, which I will discuss in another video, as I said. But as I said, usually I go with 4 to 5 magazines when I am doing full auto or more armor piercing, or when I'm dealing with having to fight people who have body armor or higher level plates. Usually I go with 4 to 5, depending on the length of the map, armor piercing rounds of 5.56. A lot of the time I stay away from sidearm ammo, sometimes completely neglecting it, just to get an extra mag in a better weapon, which is going to be your primary. Obviously, the downside of this is that you can't go around tight corners, but for shorter, smaller maps, you don't really need that many magazines, especially if you are aiming very accurately most of the time. So when it comes to a map like Sins of the Father, doing full auto is pretty normal, and I would probably advise this to be most of the time what you would be going with, simply because on this level, a lot of it is just tight corridors, and you really do need to take out the targets quickly because they do end up having higher caliber of weapons. And also you can just like pulse and burst fire the trigger. As you can see, I can take down targets very quickly, and these guys do have some level of body armor. It's not the best of body armor, but it is body armor nonetheless, so it is a benefit to trying to go full auto. Most of the ranges on certain maps, you're going to be going pretty mid range and close range engagements, so I would almost always recommend, if you are in this type of distance, like this is probably about the max distance you'd want to go and shoot at full auto most of the time. But a lot of the time, going full auto in these tight corridors where there is potential of body armor or even not body armor, it's always going to help you and make sure that every target you are killing is going to go down immediately. So it's important to really focus. And obviously there is different types of weapons with different types of recoil, where sometimes full auto just can't be warranted. Now, I did discuss some of this in one of my other videos where I am talking about which attachments offer the most recoil reduction. I am probably going to make a video talking about which weapons to take in terms of which weapons are the best in terms of the recoil reduction, and just general what's good overall. But a lot of the time, most weapons, assuming you have the correct attachments, full auto is very viable, and it is very controllable even over longer distances once you learn the recoil pattern of your weapon. Now, of course, if you have a very good trigger finger, you really don't need to worry about going full auto, but it really does help assist you in making it so you do not have to strain to click at Mach 10. For me, myself, as an individual, I can click very quickly on a mouse. Obviously, it does require certain types of mouse positioning, but on average, like, I would imagine I can probably click 7 times per second. And this is a variable, so it's not going to be exactly always the same speed. Like, functionally, I can click that fast. Obviously, I can technically click faster. Like, the actual max speed I can click is, I believe it was 12.5 clicks per second. But obviously, this is non-functional in terms of, like, my hand positioning and mouse positioning. Usually, the kill times on your fully automatic is going to be higher in general. Obviously, if you are someone who likes to aim for the head, like Thanos tells you to, kill times can obviously be faster, but a lot of the time it's not always going to be the case that you're always going to be able to always hit your target when you are getting fired at, or if your arm is damaged, and there is that penalty for aiming and recoil where it is not as good and even when you are firing, so it can cause difficulties. Depending on how effective you are with control of your firing, usually if you're doing fully automatic, you can expect to use about 1.5 to like 2 to 3 times the ammo, depending on how controlled you are firing and shooting. Usually with single fire, depending on the targets, I will usually do 3 shots if I'm doing single fire, so 1 2 3, almost default. And then if there is armored targets or certain distances, I'll usually be firing off 5 rounds. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 immediately in quick succession when I'm doing single fire. When I'm doing fully automatic, it's usually in closer range combat, just because sometimes I can't be focusing on how fast I'm pressing the trigger, and having a weapon that shoots very quickly is always going to be beneficial and can allow you to easily point, click, and once you see that there is like some type of death animation, or you know that you've landed enough bullets, you can then go and swap to the next target in your vicinity. So on levels like Barista Cove, or Ides of March, as it is also known, this is where it is nice to have full auto, simply because these guys have very high rate of fire weapons as well. So you need to take them out before they take you out. And a lot of the time you can do this with just single fire, but you do need to fire still very quickly. So a lot of the time it's just going to be beneficial to, assuming that you're not trying to just control for recoil, stay on full auto. Now, full auto is super handy for obvious reasons, right? I can come to the room, and if I see that they're still alive, I can burst again for a few rounds. But if it's single shot, I do need to take more time, especially if I want to maintain my general accuracy. Now, if you are somebody who can study their weapon very well, it's totally not a big difference, but for the average person, it's definitely going to make a big difference when you are on full auto or single fire shot. Now, a lot of the time, you won't be able to really tell the difference if someone is experienced and trying to use semi-auto versus full auto. A lot of the time, I will just use it simply because it's less of a hassle to try to spam click when I can focus on just holding down the button and controlling where it goes. It does help a little bit when you are trying to take out a target very accurately. Holding down that trigger, depending on the weapon you're using, can make a ginormous difference. So for something like Barista Cove, as long as assuming you have armor-piercing rounds, which you basically always should, the majority of the time, depending on the weapon you're using, but with 5.56, it's always going to be armor-piercing. There's almost no reason to use JHP unless you are trying to, for some reason, get a better rank, but at that point, you should just try to be getting S ranks at that point, I feel. But it is important to note, whenever you are going full auto, make sure you are choosing the right attachments, because if you don't have the right attachments when you're going full auto, it's going to be a really bad time. And depending on the certain types of weapons that you are using, like if you're using a 7.62, you're probably 99% of the time going to be using single shot. If for some reason you are using full auto with a 7.62 ammo type weapon, then either you are very good at controlling recoil, or you just love to shoot a lot and you like the sound it makes. You totally can use 7.62 rounds in full auto. A lot of the time, it's usually going to be done in a burst, just simply because depending on the weapon, and as I said, the attachments that you have on the weapon, those make the biggest difference, will determine if you are going full auto. Now, for certain things where going into a very hostile, rich environment, going full auto is just nice to have, especially if there are limited number of civilians in that area. You know that as soon as you see somebody, you can basically light them up immediately, and the more rounds, the more likely you are to hit, the more likely you are to hit, the more likely you are to kill them. So all of these things are very helpful for places where it is a high hostile area with high levels of body armor, usually plates of 3 or 4, depending on the enemies that you are fighting. And obviously, it is just a click of a button to swap between firing modes. If you are, let's say, at distance and playing a location, single fire can be very helpful, especially if there's a hostage situation. Sometimes you don't have enough time to react, especially if there are other things increasing the stress of the hostage taker, because they will be more likely to shoot the suspect if you are, let's say, firing full auto and you're missing, or there is a flashbang. So single shot can definitely help you manage those situations where you are trying to save a hostage's life. Now, obviously, it's not really if I should be single fire or if I should be full auto. You'll be swapping back and forth. It really just comes down to what you should be using at the moment that you're in. If you're in a situation where there is a lot of high armored, high hostility, high stress targets, then full auto is going to be very helpful, especially since if they are running around in an area and you're trying to shoot them single fire, you might land a couple hits. They won't get staggered unless you hit them a few times. So going full auto can make a ginormous difference. And all of this footage is, of course, done on the hardest difficulty. That's the only difficulty I really play on nowadays, simply because a lot of the time, standard, when it was the default difficulty, the game ended up being too easy, and on hard mode, it does make it a little bit more enjoyable, as it does create more for a challenge. But during these things between doing single and full auto, it does make a difference when you're on a higher difficulty. These things are more important. On the lower difficulties, they won't be as important, technically speaking. Of course, they are still going to be valuable on any difficulty. Now, a couple of notes when talking about going full auto. If you are going full auto with certain weapons, the attachments you will always want to take are going to be these specific ones. Any undergrip barrel that is giving you vertical recoil reduction, so the TH grip and the vertical grip are always, every single time, going to be your best bet for recoil reduction. All of the other ones aren't significant enough to make any level of difference anywhere in your gameplay. There is some tiny differences, but generally speaking, you're always going to be more accurate, perform better in every avenue when you are reducing your vertical recoil for your weapon. There is, to my understanding, no exception to this for any weapon. There are a few things that, obviously, if you don't have the option for anything else other than those grips, it's kind of up to you which one you want to take. A lot of the time, they don't make a big difference, quite frankly, from what I was able to tell and test with them when I did test with them, with some minor short testing and just from my experience of playing. When it comes to a weapon that is a 7.62 round, this is still going to be the case. You're going to be taking the TH grip or the vertical grip. Now, when it comes to the muzzle, the SFMB break offers the highest level of reduction. I think it's around like 40 or 50% in that kind of range or whatever. I'm not sure the specific percentage. The ASR break is basically the next highest one in terms of vertical recoil reduction, but it's still not as high as the SFMB. There's no point in actually taking this as far as I'm aware of. The SFMB is just the best one overall, no matter what. And when it comes to suppressors, it's a very interesting concept. Maybe I'll talk about it in a video. There is some use for suppressors. You have to be playing in a very particular way for it to be effective. And a lot of the time, it doesn't really make a huge difference unless you are a very experienced player. So there is value in the suppressor, but almost just like in real life, whenever you are using a suppressor, it's only reducing the sound of it by like 20 decibels roughly. So a huge explosion minus 20 decibels is still a huge explosion, just minus 20 decibels. So a lot of the time, the suppressor doesn't really have much value. But obviously, when it comes to certain weapons where it's like integrated, like the LVAR, this is obviously very different because you don't have a muzzle option. It's just default built in. And similar to the SLR 47, it doesn't have very many options. It's either you have the suppressor on or off. Sometimes I'll leave it on even though it increases my recoil, but that's just because I like the sound it makes. But when it comes to that, certain weapons are going to be limited in their choices. When it comes to SMGs, a lot of the time you're just going full auto. There's not really much reason not to, and they don't have as bad recoil, but you will want to be shooting a lot of rounds simply because most of the ammo from SMGs is less effective versus armored targets. When it comes to something like a P90, the recoil is a little bit scattered left and right for the horizontal recoil, and the upward recoil is not too bad, but a lot of the time it's the same thing. You just want to go full auto. Maybe you'll switch to semi-automatic just for those hostage situations. But let's be real, if you're picking the P90, a lot of the time you're just picking it so you can full auto on a suspect. When it comes to certain weapons like this weapon right here, the DM4 PDW, it's important to note this gun has an insane amount of vertical recoil. When it comes to this weapon, honestly, this weapon has a lot of recoil, even with a vertical grip and a suppressor, which is the only option for vertical reduction for this weapon. The single fire is a lot of recoil. Obviously, I can control it, but that's me. This is me shooting without any recoil like control from my mouse. It is quite a lot of recoil on full auto, and I'm pretty good at like recoil reduction. It is a lot to control. I have to pull my mouse back a lot, and usually I'm not trying to pull my mouse back that often. It's probably a good inch of me trying to control the recoil, and that's also considering things like an enemy moving. So for example, if there's like enemies moving or I have to change targets, it is a lot of vertical recoil for this weapon. And because this weapon is 300 blackout, and this one specifically is usually the worst one out of the recoil, how much recoil it has compared to the other ones, this one is probably the worst. When it comes to like the LVAR or the ARN 180, I think it's called, those ones are way better. They have better attachments and they have less recoil. They're all blackout, so they are a little bit better at like staggering opponents, and they still have really good armor penetration. But when it comes to this specific weapon and a few other weapons like the SLR, those ones just have naturally a lot of recoil. They're going to be hard to control. So for the majority of everyone, I would recommend single fire. Just try to shoot in a pattern where you're able to control the recoil enough to stay on target. Obviously, it will lower your kill times for your suspects, but a lot of the time, these bullets can be very staggering to your opponent, and a lot of the time, I believe it does. It kind of performs better in a lot of ways in terms of damage. But with this one specifically, it does have a lot of recoil, so just note that you're likely going to be using single fire rather than full auto for this type of weapon. So managing this recoil on full auto is very tricky, and with vertical recoil, if you're not prepared for it either, especially if you're trying to get fine, like you can control it a little bit better because it's less zoomed out, but a lot of the time you're still going to be having a hard time with recoil control because you have to consider a moving target, you being able to hit your target, not hitting other targets, the target shooting at you, also causing some type of agitation. So like when you get hit, your character kind of tends to move back and forth or whatever. If you get hit, you'll like kind of stagger off to the left or whatever kind of thing. So getting shot also decreases your recoil or changes your path of aiming. So it's important to note. And obviously if you have like an arm injury, it will affect how much recoil you have as well. You'll be less able to control recoil. And this is very true for something like this, where you already have a poor level of recoil. So it's important to know this weapon's going to perform even worse when you get an arm injury, which is usually the most common location to get shot in, since that is kind of close to your center of mass, and it's a decently sized target since your arms are in front of your body. And then when it comes to 7.62 rounds, a lot of the time, single fire is usually going to be your best bet. You can kind of shoot a quick couple of shots and you can maintain good accuracy and good spread. A lot of the time, depending on the weapon, and make sure you do still have all those great attachments that I have talked about before, you still can control your accuracy a lot better. But because you have less ammo in your magazine, each shot is going to be way more important to not miss. With a 30-round mag, you can kind of have the luxury of missing and still continuing to fire. A lot of the time I found using a 7.62 round, it was pretty rare that I would ever do full auto. And if I did do full auto, I would just do a quick little burst fire, kind of like this, where I am going between target to target. Usually 2 to 3 rounds is enough to take out the majority of all targets with a 7.62, especially on the lower difficulties. On harder, it's a little bit more tricky, since I do believe they have a little bit more of a health pool. And for some reason, 5.56 is better at dealing with that in terms of like, I feel like it does the exact amount of damage enough to kill the target, where this one just doesn't do just enough damage to finish off a target with like 1 or 2 shots. So on a hard difficulty, it takes like 3 shots a lot of the time, depending if you're shooting body armor, of course. But swapping between targets, getting a few burst shots off can be very valuable. So when you are doing something like full auto on a 7.62, obviously making sure that you are burst firing to control a bit better. And hilariously enough, that 300 blackout weapon I just showed you, this one has less recoil than it. It actually has sometimes something called like what I like to call negative vertical recoil. So like there is a level of recoil that is happening, but once it reaches a certain point of firing, the recoil will be decreased a lot more, and then you can actually like not control the recoil. You don't have to control the recoil as much after you've been shooting for a while. So it actually gets easier to control the recoil in a tighter spread. It's very interesting. And when it comes to everybody's favorite weapon, because it's used by the Navy SEALs, everyone loves this weapon. Everyone loves to roleplay with this weapon. They like to put a vertical foregrip with, you know, the infrared laser sight in this game, and using the silencer suppressor on the front of it. This one is a very interesting type of weapon when it comes to recoil for single shot and full auto. Something to note, certain weapons, after they've been firing for a while, they will be easier to control the recoil after the first initial burst. Now, for some reason, as you shoot, the recoil will decrease for certain weapons. Now, with this weapon, I've experienced, and you can kind of see, like, I have the highest reduction, vertical recoil reduction on this weapon. It climbs very high per shot. And it's the same thing with full auto. I can control it, but it's a constant pushing up of vertical recoil. And even with single fire, you have to maintain that control. It's a little bit less recoil, of course, since it is shooting slower. But when it comes to a gun like the Mark 18, something really weird happens. As I said with the previous gun, the per shot recoil is high, and it's pretty similar to how it is with the Mark 18, a little bit less recoil, let's be honest. And then when it's full auto, if you are holding it down for a little bit, the recoil tends to like decrease in its aggressiveness. So it's not like it's a constant level of recoil. It kind of like tapers off kind of in the middle way, and then it starts to get that recoil back again. So for a Mark 18, you can do like quick little bursts with good fire rate and good accuracy, where I was doing very little recoil control. If you hold it down all the way, then the recoil starts to pick up, as you can kind of see like at the end near of that magazine, that recoil started to pick up. Now, with this weapon, it seems to maintain its vertical recoil pattern. So it will constantly be pushing up the same rate of recoil, and this can be good because you are controlling it in the exact same way, but it can also be bad because there is a higher level of recoil with this weapon. Now, a lot of the time, weapon to weapon, the damage is pretty much going to be the same no matter what, since they're all using the same type of ammunition. So a lot of the time, like a weapon like this, it's good, but so is every other weapon. It's a gun that shoots bullets. And obviously this is applying to the game. This isn't applying to real life. This is a video game. These guns have stats and different behavioral patterns with recoil and all of this other stuff. This isn't balanced to real life. It's a close analog maybe, but generally speaking, there are going to be differences. It's not going to be perfectly true. Now, Navy SEALs might use this weapon, but people who play this game usually aren't always going to be Navy SEALs. Maybe there's a few out there. I'm sure there is, but just because Navy SEALs use this weapon in real life, it doesn't mean they use this gun in real life. When it comes to the SLR, for example, this is an interesting one. Pretty much all the time, because this has a slower rate of fire, this one has a lot of kick. So after the first shot, it's not too bad. You can kind of like, as long as you are timing it correctly, the recoil won't be too bad. If you start shooting quicker, obviously the recoil is going to be worse. And then you're going to have to compensate for that aggressive recoil. On full auto, it's a little bit more manageable for some reason. I'm not sure why a lot of the time. It might be just because you are ready to do the recoil reduction. But this weapon actually becomes... It has less recoil the longer it shoots, weirdly enough. What I've kind of noticed. Now, as you can kind of see near the end of that recoil, it's kind of hard to tell. But when I am just putting full auto and just holding the trigger, not controlling the recoil, you'll notice the initial recoil is high, but then when you get to the end, it starts to taper out and slow down on that recoil. So what's interesting about this weapon is that if you are trying to be more accurate and kill a target, and let's say a lot of targets, swapping targets while holding that trigger down can be very valuable, but obviously that means wasting more ammunition. So when it comes to certain things like switching targets, like as you can see, that initial recoil when I swapped over here was very high, very aggressive. So certain weapons like this can be tricky to handle. You can overcome it. I actually use this gun quite a bit simply because I like using bad guns, because to me, this game isn't as difficult for me since I've been playing for so long and I understand how to play the game. So adding a little bit more extra challenge of using a different weapon that's a little bit less effective or harder to use or handle is more enjoyable for me. Obviously, if I'm trying to take something serious, I will change to something better. But when it comes to playing the game, I always like to challenge myself, and I enjoy using the various weapons, of course, as well. Things that will be coming up when Outward 2 releases. I'm not sure if anybody has any interest in Outward 2. But I will be covering that game and playing the hell out of that game. I'll be making a lot of content out of that. I loved Outward 1. I might even start doing a couple videos on that, depending on if there is a potential interest. Just depends on how it works out. I do have a lot of videos that I still need to create with Ready or Not. In a few videos that I've skipped in Remnant, I was going to make a few more build videos, but things kind of got out of hand with the Ready or Not release, and I was really enjoying playing Ready or Not with all the new content. But stay tuned for Outward 2 content. I will be covering a lot stuff on that game. I'll probably be doing some Let's Plays and playthroughs with friends and everything like that. So if you're excited for that, let me know. Also, if you guys have any interest in other types of games and you'd want me to cover them, or you just play them and, let's say I want to play them too, tell me down below what games you play, what games you enjoy. And if you want me to cover that game in some type of manner or fashion, I would definitely be down and open to seeing what you guys have to say. But with that, that's the end of the video, and thanks for watching. Also, like and subscribe. Come on, guys, you guys can subscribe. You guys know how to... You guys have been on YouTube for quite a while now, huh? You guys should like and subscribe. Also, comment. Also, put the bell notification on. You guys know how to do that, right? You guys are smart. You guys are an intelligent bunch. I know you guys are. Okay, that's it.